I arrived at a pea-green footbridge to nowhere. From my vantage point on the towpath, the bridge's brushed-steel curves rose and dipped over the river before disappearing into a thick cluster of privet. I had passersby stroll over. Most peeped and retreated. The more brazen continued, swallowed by the hedges into one of London's most fascinating enclaves. This is Eel Pie Island, one of around 180 river islets, known as aits, or aits on the Thames, born of the river's meandering, 184-mile path from the Cotswold Hills to the North Sea. You may also be interested in London's most welcoming neighbourhood, the town that predicted the world's end. London's secret underground mail rail mudbanks like Chiswick Gate, a thickly wooded nature reserve populated by herons and Canada geese, were sculpted on the river's route. At high tide the tiny piece of land is swallowed whole, just a few lone branches eerily piercing the surface. Eel Pie Island, near Twickenham, was carved as the river took a detour and forged a parallel path slicing it from the mainland. Since the 17th century, when according to a 1635 map there was a bowling alley on the island, it has been a haven for hedonists, lovers and philanderers. Its seclusion, it could only be reached by boat until the footbridge was erected in 1957, made it a dream for extramarital affairs. Local stories say that wealthy men would bribe the ferrymen not to let their wives across so they could canoodle with their mistresses undisturbed. The island is named for the eel pies sold at its 19th century hotel, rarely spotted now. The slippery, snake-like fish were once abundant in this part of the Thames. The inn burned down in a mysterious 1971 fire, but the decades of entertainment, from ballroom dancing and beatnik jazz to early performances by the Rolling Stones and Rod Stewart, are still spoken about in reverential tones. Trevor Bayliss frequented the hotel as a teenager, lured from his home in Kilburn in northwest London by pretty girls and jazz. Smitten by the spit of land, the inventor built a home here in 1971. The community grew from just a few huts to around 50 homes with old hippies, young families and people with a special kind of spirit. "We were a family then, and we're a family now," Bayliss said. "We were a family then, and we're a family now." The footbridge led onto a narrow, shaded footpath marked by a "Private Island" sign. I followed it past tumble-down cottages to a screeching, spitting, working boatyard, emerging among a cluster of Ramsell artist studios. The walkways were cluttered with pots, rotor and tables and empty champagne bottles stuffed with candles. A skeleton spindly legs dangled from a bird cage overhead. Dressmakers' dummies were topped with plant pot heads. "This avant-garde display is the work of island gardener Twig," Lee Campbell explained, as we sat in the forest green, corrugate tan shed she shares with elderly lurcher Holly. Campbell, a landscape painter from New Zealand, has rented the studio for 17 years, but lives on the mainland. "Now and then a bunch of old hippies come staggering over, asking if the hotel is still here," she said. "They're looking for the party." For Campbell, the island's appeal is a tranquil space to paint. She also likes walking back over the bridge each afternoon, to Dryland. For those who live, work or accidentally visit here, Eel Pie is endlessly enthralling. Like many of the other eyots that loop along the Thames like the eyes of needles, it's a time capsule of land, memories and tall tales. It's a time capsule of land, memories and tall tales. Before ship-shape Ravens 8 became a luxury wedding venue, a dozen squatters took over for several months in 2009, claiming it should be common land. They argued that it was on this tiny islet that King John signed documents leading to the ratification of the Magna Carta. It was actually the Treaty of Kingston, a 1217 peace treaty with France, that was signed here. Further west, as the river flows through Berkshire, the boldly named Magna Carta Island also contends to be where the king sealed the charter. It's yet to be proven. Oliver's Island, near Kew, is named after claims that Oliver Cromwell took refuge here and built a tunnel connecting the Eight to the Bull's Head pub on the opposite bank. The story has been widely discredited and no amount of digging has unearthed the tunnel. On nearby Tagg's Island, a dusty path loops past gardens rambling with roses, lavender and bamboo canes. A sun-dappled footbridge spans the central lagoon, circled by floating homes. Boat builder Thomas George Tagg leased the island in the 1850s, crafting a reputation for vessels painted in bold colors and adorned with balustrades, elaborate carvings and striped awnings. Artists, writers and those with money to spare flocked to the island. Fred West caught head with envy. Busking near Hampton Courtlock, he dreamed of living by the teardrop-shaped island. Changing his surname to Carno, he launched a circus with a troupe of them-known performers including Charlie Chaplin and Max Miller, and invented the custard pie and face gag. Fortune made, he moved to Tagg's in 1903, ensuring his was the biggest and most luxurious boat circling the land. The richly textured tapestry of history and culture on these 180 isles, of which 30 are inhabited, deserves to be preserved and shared. Michelle Whitby, who runs a houseboat moored to Eel Pie Island, is working on doing just that. Whitby has been gathering oral histories from the island's residents for her Eel Pie Museum, set to open in Twickenham by early 2018. The first buildings were beach huts, she said. There are stories of rich businessmen spending weekends there with their mistresses. For Eel Pie residents, who are aged 17 to 70, the common thread that binds them is an adventurous spirit. This life isn't for everyone. Sometimes you have to wade through water to get home because the tide has risen across the bottom of the bridge, Whitby said. But our world is the real world. People either leave within a year, or leave in a wooden box. Bayliss won't leave any other way. At 80, the bachelor still has a spring in his shuffle. His house and studio, The Haven, is tucked down a dusty track off the main path. Entering is like diving into Mary Poppins' carpetbag. I was greeted by a tiny, white, stuffed cat curled in permanent sleep on a drawing board. Beyond it were higgledy-piggledy racks of tools, plastic trays overflowing with nuts and bolts and steering wheels hooked to the wall. Bayliss invented the wind-up radio, and a dozen early models were dotted around the workshop. People either leave within a year, or leave in a wooden box. I built the house of my dreams, he said, escorting me past his swimming pool to his living area. The walls were a collage of photos, a gaggle of girlfriends, posters of Audrey Hepburn, Bayliss' all-time favorite actress, and a picture of Nelson Mandela with the inventor, proudly holding the radio that helped educate people about the spread of HIV and AIDS in Africa. The pair became good pals, Bayliss told me. Bookshelves buckled under encyclopedias. A wine rack made with leftover piping was built into the wall. Smudged glass doors led out to the turf terrace overlooking the river. Upstairs, Bayliss sleeps surrounded by more books and under a huge poster of Audrey. Trevor's CV he gave me a copy reads like the achievements of an entire alumni. There's his open recognition of his inventions, his career as a stunt double for Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, the fact he swam for the British national team when he was 15. He even built a car, designed and cobbled together by hand. Despite the island having no roads, she has about 5 meters on the clock, Bayliss chuckled, sweeping a hand towards the lipstick red motor that's permanently parked on his lower terrace. Blondie, a Hokkaido dog, lolled by the counter as Bayliss brewed tea in his tiny kitchen. Back on the terrace, we listened to one of his wind-up radios. On the opposite bank, a jogger appeared intermittently through the trees. A lone kayaker paddled by. Occasionally, large tourist boats pass by and guides point Bayliss out as a local attraction. A raven squawked above our heads, hopping from side to side on a branch. There's my neighbor, Bayliss joked. Reclining and puffing on his pipe, he heaved a contented sigh. I've been a lucky guy, he said, eyes crinkling in a smile. What more could I want? Join more than 3 million BBC Travel fans by liking us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you liked this story, sign up for the weekly BBC.com features newsletter called If You Only Read 6 Things This Week. A hand-picked selection of stories from BBC Future, Earth, Culture, Capital and Travel, delivered to your inbox every Friday.